Welcome to this episode of Chapter Chats. I'm here with Dr. Chuck Hodel, and we are going to discuss Chapter 10, Behavioral Objectives. Chuck, let's talk about behavioral objectives.
Everybody is just sitting on the edge of their chairs. This is the one chapter I'll bet that most students look at and say, you know what? This is going to be something I'm not sure I'm going to get into right away. Because they are a little, right? Now, what did you think when you started? You loved them, but what did you think when you first started looking at them as a 602 student?
When I first started looking at behavioral objectives, I didn't realize how complex they were. And just writing them, it seemed very redundant to me. It seemed like a very redundant process at first, before I understood why that redundancy is so important. Before you understand that, it seems like, why am I, it just seems so, without error, like all of the conditions and everything just seemed like, I wasn't sure if it was worth it. Like, why do we have to do this? It seems really ridiculous, over the top. Who's going to read this? Is a client going to worry about this? Is a design team going to worry about this? And it turns out, after I put together a design plan, and then I went into writing a lesson plan according to that design plan, I realized how important they were.
And that's the thing. And a lot of times you get this pushback. So as a student of ISD, as you're reading this chapter, you want to remember that most designers with a lot of experience will look at this as the one thing that will help them determine if an instructional designer actually knows what they're doing. This is one of those litmus tests. And if you can write a 4-part objective, you're probably halfway there to proving your credibility in this field. And they're never easy to write. I still struggle sometimes with them because, as I will say in the chapter and later here, that if you can't write an objective for something, there's probably an issue with the process. So there's something wrong with what you're trying to do if you can't write an objective for it. And that's one of our safety valves, which you learn after a while as you struggle and you hit your head because you can't write it. And then you figure out, oh, I got a big problem here. That's why I can't write this. So as we go through the chapter, and we'll talk about all these things, just keep in mind that everybody is on a learning curve with these, even the best. And just get in here, think about them, and you'll be fine with it. Excellent.
You know, one of the things you had asked me to do in prepping for this particular episode was send me a 4-part objective. And
you struggled, didn't you?
I think that my eyes, if you could have seen me, my eyes look like a deer in headlights. And I'm like, oh gosh, let me remember what that is. Oh gosh. And then I calmed down. And I said, okay, think it through. And then within 5 minutes, I created an example and I sent it to you. And you said, good job.
Exactly. I was like, but you had to think about it, and that's the point.
Absolutely. So let's just talk a little bit about what is the role that objectives play in the instructional design process.
Well, they're the foundation. Your design plan in general, when you put that together, is really your foundation of everything you're doing for a project or a course. But the literal foundation of this is your behavioral objectives, because this is where you identify what you want learners to be able to do and how well you want to be able to do them. And in professional instructional design, we also add this notion of conditions and audience. Audience is who the learner actually is, which sounds simple, but it's not always easy to define. And conditions are the givens. What are we going to provide for a learner, both in the learning experience and in the evaluation process, to determine whether or not they can reach mastery?
A question I have is, for somebody watching this who is not, say, a professional instructional designer, or who maybe hasn't been trained as a professional instructional designer, what would happen if you didn't write a 4-part objective when you're trying to create a course?
Fair question. And if you don't write 4-part objectives, if you don't write behavioral objectives, whether you write 3, 4, or 5, there's 6-part objectives in some worlds in a parallel universe. We're going to stick with 4, but the whole notion is this is a professionalization of the process and the work that you perform. It's one of those things that you may write thousands or 10,000. I mean, I've seen projects that had over 10,000 objectives. And the notion is that if you can't define what you want someone to learn, then you're never going to be able to define mastery. And if you can't define either of those things, then I'm not sure exactly what you're doing when you're putting together a course or a program. So these are just basic building blocks. These are things that you have to be able to do this. And if you don't, you can tell instantly in a program or in a course when it just drifts all over the place. There's no expectation of mastery. It's simply a participation event or a seminar or whatever you want to call it. Those are fine. They have their place, but it's not what we do in professional instructional design. When we're putting together courses, there are expectations that learners reach mastery.
I think about a house foundation when you were saying that, the building blocks. If you do not put a foundation, if you do not dig a foundation in which to build a structure, then that structure is very much at risk of just collapse.
No, it's going to collapse. Now, think about it, too, in terms of not just a residential structure. Think about a skyscraper. Think about something that's 110 stories or 120 stories. And if you don't start with the right foundation, which would be your objectives, and you're building a program with, let's say, you have 110 courses, which is not that unusual. If you don't get that first part of it right, the rest of it's going to fall over. And sometimes I call us the architects of instruction, and some people have batted back at me about that one, but I think it's true. I mean, we put together specifications for courses and programs, and this is one of those. So if you look at a blueprint, what do you have on there? You have electrical plans, you have plumbing plans, you have all kind of different views of what something's going to look like. And without that, there's no way to put together something that's going to be anything I would want to be in or you would want to be in. Same for instruction. These are the building blocks. This is how you do it. This is the blueprint. This is how you put together the foundation.
Why is it important for objectives to be both measurable and to be able to be observable?
Yeah, fair question too. And where we get this is this notion that if I can't measure it and I can't observe it, what do I have? So are you going to have courses where people are simply judged on the fact that they show up and last for as long as the course lasts? Is that the objective that you want to have for your learner? And sometimes people do that, but it's not really where we want to go with professional design. So you have to have something that you can look at. You have to have something that you can measure. And this gets us out of this realm of subjectivity. And you know as well as anyone, when I see objectives written with understand and learn and other subjective wording, I just want to pull what little hair I have out, because there's no way you can measure that and there's no way you can observe that. And I'd be willing to place a bet that if you're looking at 100 learners in a classroom, or you're doing a Zoom learning event and you have 100 people on stage on your monitor and you're looking at all of them, you tell me which one was successful. You tell me which one learned. You can't do it. You got to measure. You got to look. You got to dig. And this all starts with objectives.
Absolutely. And, some of these subjective words, understand, learn, would you classify successful as well as part of that, like adjectives?
Absolutely. Yeah, what's successful? My success, here's why it's important. And Denise, I think this is a key point for everybody that's learning this, or even seasoned designers will tell you this. If you don't measure the same way for every learner and have the same standard for every learner, then you have no point of comparison. And in higher education, if you aren't equally grading and assessing performance, then you've got a real problem with lots of people, including regional accreditors and others. But let's look at it in a private sense of, let's say we're doing a course for a company or an organization. If you can't accurately judge what each learner is able to do and compare that as a group, you have nothing either. And these are all the little side effects of this process that people don't think about until they get deep into it. But you need to be able to be fair about this too. So if you say to be able to pass this course, you have to do the following, and it's very observable and measurable, then everybody has a fair chance. Each learner is on an equal footing. If it's subjective, then I, as an instructor, or you as an instructor, could say, well, this person really tried even though they couldn't do it, so let's just say that that's good enough. And you get into this whole area of learner popularity and what's the relationship between an instructor and a student. I might like you more because you come up and talk to me, or you send me emails and ask me questions, and this other learner doesn't, so I don't think they're going to make it. You take all of this out of that equation. And when you're spending lots of money for stuff and where you have to do accreditation and certification, there's no option on this.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's well stated. Now, when we're talking about behavioral objectives, we need to designate terminal and enabling objectives. Can you explain the difference for those who don't know what that means?
This is something that people struggle with, and I have to admit that sometimes I struggle with it too. But terminal objectives are your exit competency. So what is the sum of everything that you are going to ask a learner to try to do within a course? And you can also have terminal objectives for programs, which would be a group of courses. So in essence, what you're going to do is put all your conditions and all your behaviors, the summation of those, into one objective, and that's the exit competency. So when you look at enabling objectives, what those are the building blocks for that terminal objective. So if you have one terminal objective, you might have 5 enabling objectives, you might have 100. It just depends on what those building blocks are. So it's theoretically an easy call, and it's easy for me to say, but I can assure you that in my students, whether they're graduate students or not, it seems to me that they struggle more with terminal objectives than enabling objectives. I think most people can write the steps of a process or a skill or what they want learners to be able to do. But sometimes they really struggle with the notion of what is the sum of all this? What is this end product, and how can I describe it in one objective? So as you write these as a student, as you look through this chapter, you're going to ask yourself, gosh, okay, I think I know what the enabling objectives are because I'm kind of used to that. But let me try to write a summation of all these and be able to do it in a concise format that fits within what we talk about in this chapter. And don't be discouraged if it doesn't happen the first time, because it will happen. But that's the difference. Terminal, exit competencies. Enabling, building blocks are the summation elements that get you to that terminal objective.
You might have seen me nodding my head a lot when you were talking about that, about the summing up the terminal objectives, because I think that
it's not easy.
I agree. Now, I'm taking this from a writing point of view where I can write an entire novel easier than I can write the back of the book blurb.
Exactly.
I struggle more with that than I do with writing the entire 80,000 word novel.
Exactly.
Putting that into 200 words that entice a person, or it sums it all up, that's really difficult. So I can definitely.
Yeah, it's difficult. And I'll tell you that people that don't understand instructional design, people that are on committees or boards or clients or folks that are paying for things or have a role to play that aren't in the design process, often only want to work with you in terms of terminal objectives. They do not want to sit down and go through 10,000 objectives. They're going to say, tell me what the sum of this is. Tell me what they're going to be able to do when they leave. So you have to be okay with it. You're going to have to work at it, but you can. That's the point.
Okay. Now you bring up short form and long form objectives in this chapter. What's the difference? And when would a designer use one over the other?
Well, one thing that we've talked about is the NOP analysis, and that's where you use short form objectives. This essentially is just, okay, this is what they need to be able to do. Long form objectives are the 4-part objectives that we're talking about, and the more formal behavioral objectives. So if you're not at a point in the process where you need to do 4 parts and you just want to sketch out a plan for what you're going to do, you can use the smaller short form, and they're just fine.
Perfect. Okay. And now, another question is, why is recognizing objective domains an important decision and consideration in writing your objectives?
Well, this has a lot to do with performance agreement, which we'll talk about here in a second. But you have to remain in the same objective domain when you're talking about the relationship between your behaviors and what you're asking people to do in an evaluation task. Because if you flip objective domains, and this is one of the first things I look for when I review a program that's struggling or a course that isn't running well, is look and see if we're asking for the same things in both of these places. And the remedy to that is to change one or the other, but the notion being that if you're in cognitive domain and you're objective, you need to evaluate in cognitive domain, interpersonal, on through the 4 of them. And as you look at those in this chapter, Dr. Ramazowski came up with the interpersonal domain. He started this work looking at online learning and thinking about the relationship of online communities and whatever. So I've added that to the 3 traditional objective domains. And Dr. Romazowski was nice enough to let me use his work when I first started publishing on the domains. And I thank him for that if he ever watches this. But this notion of, objectives are just objectives. Well, no, my friends, you're digging down now. We're getting into domains. And this is the domain of really professional instructional designers, is to be able to differentiate and realize the significance of the role these plays in our design community, specifically in our objectives.
Yeah, those domains, to me, are probably one of the, so far in my ISD studies, that seems to be one of the things I struggle the most with, is understanding those different domains and how they relate to writing the objectives and evaluating against those objectives based on those domains. I think that's really complex.
The example I've given in some of the videos we've done is the nursing school, and the notion that the objective said they're going to be able to do something, and the evaluation was they're going to be able to write about it. And that doesn't work. I could write about lots of things that I can't do. I could tell you how to fly a plane and, 1,000 other things, but don't put me in a cockpit. And this is kind of the story here. This is professional design. This is why it's so important. And the fact that you struggle with it, Denise, tells me that this is a good thing to have here, because designers have to think about all this stuff. You really do. And if you can't come up with a performance agreement and really appreciate what it does for design and for objectives, then you're kind of stuck in a plateau of design efficiency that you can move beyond very quickly with these kinds of things.
And so that leads me to the last point is performance agreement. And you just really brought that home for me in terms of why performance agreement is so important in ISD work. It's helping us to understand the relationship between what we're asking someone to do and evaluating them accordingly in the right domains.
Yeah. I mean, this is the work that Dr. Cook did. I took a lot of his work and put it into the terms that I look at it at from that perspective. And I don't know how you don't use these kind of things in instructional design, especially in objectives, because people look at this and say, oh, well, you guys don't do anything but PowerPoints. And, well, excuse me, we do. We go so far in detail in things that you will spin your head if you try to keep up. This is a science, and part of the science is relationships between the known and the unknown, relationships between different things from which you judge and view. And without performance agreement, you could have objectives that said anything and then ask for anything in evaluation. And who's to say that that's not okay? It's this kind of professionalism and attention to detail that makes the difference in professional design.
Absolutely. Now, as we wrap up this particular episode, I think it might be helpful to show a slide.
Yes.
And to talk through, just to give an example of the example that I provided to you today in preparation.
Isn't this amazing?
For this. Yes.
Well, let's look at that.
Okay.
So what you're going to see, you have a terminal objective and you have enabling objectives. So the terminal objective is the sum of what the enablers will tell you to do. And in each of these, you're going to have an audience, behavior, condition, and degree. And you'll see that in the slide. So audience, that's the learner. It's always singular because we always design for one learner, even though there might be millions of them, because that's our focus, is that one learner being able to get through this process. And there have been times when people have said, I don't think the audience element is useful. It's a waste of time. Everybody knows who the learner is. And I can give you an example of someone who ran a program for a very technical institution. I won't say what it was because it wouldn't be fair to share the story with that much detail. But they were having issues with certain courses that they were running. And after a discussion with them about audience, I asked them to define their audience in terms of their objectives, because their objectives were all the learner. I said, okay, well, define who the learner is for this course. And we started to talk about it, and the light went off in this group, and they said, you know what? We've got 3 different categories of learners here, and we have not allowed for that. And this, like many things in instructional design, is the whole point of having this discussion and thinking through these things. The end product is not the end of it. It is part of this process. So when you look at it, you think audience, okay, it's the learner. Okay, well, describe that learner. Tell me who that learner is. Is it the 602 student? Is it the paramedic student? Is it whoever it might be? Okay, define that person for this course. And then you will find sometimes, okay, well, I got a lot more going on here than I thought I did. So that's our audience. Then we're going to look at our behavior, and we've talked about that. Should be able to do something. And remember to only have one behavior in each of your objectives. Conditions are the givens. They're not third place. They're usually the first place. It's usually given such and such. The learner should be able to, the 602 student in our case should be able to, et cetera, et cetera. And degree is the level of proficiency that you expect. So be able to do this 2 out of 3 times, be able to do it without error, be able to do it once without supervision. Whatever you define degree for your objectives is fine. It doesn't matter. Just make sure it's relative to what you're doing. And the biggest mistake I see is people putting percentages here. So say, well, I should be able to do it 75% of the time. Well, you know how many times you have to do something to get to 75% mathematically? So I like to fall back on 2 out of 3, 1 out of 5, whatever you think, or without error is fine too. Whatever works for you. So that's our audience, that's our behavior, that's our condition, that's our degree. And you have these both in terminal and enabling objectives like you see in the slide.
Perfect. That explains it nicely. And it sounds simple when you say it that way, right? It sounds simple.
It's not simple.
But when you start to break them down, it gets more complex. But to me,
it's like a Picasso.
I love it. I look at it like it's a puzzle, a big jigsaw puzzle, and I have to solve it.
I need to solve it.
I love it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We're all detectives. Go out and solve it.
Yes, absolutely. I think that actually, when I think back to that course that I took with you, 602, the beginning ISD course, the writing the terminal and enabling objectives was what I enjoyed the most out of that. Because
really?
I put that detective hat on. And
for all of you looking at this video, just remember Denise said objectives are the most fun.
I'm weird.
Her email is here somewhere. You can get a hold of her. But for all of you, just pay attention to this chapter. This is a big chapter for you.
It's enjoyable. It really is. And I think it's enjoyable if you put your heart into it and you really think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And
absolutely.
It's always about that. It's always about why are you doing this? Because you want to help people learn and get to mastery.
That's it.
That's it.
Designers are here to help. I really believe that all of us really want to make people's lives better. And this is how we do it. We just do it in a very technical and sophisticated way that doesn't make sense to people sometimes.
That's right. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this episode of Chapter Chats. Hit subscribe if you'd like to have more videos like this delivered to you when they go live. Take care and, hey, happy behavioral objective writing.